A waitress approached a wealthy man, cautioning him not to go through with a deal involving his closest friend. The next morning, a sleek luxury car appeared outside her modest house. David Bennett adjusted his cuff links as he surveyed the upscale cafe. This was supposed to be a day of triumph. He and his longtime friend, Mark, were on the verge of sealing a monumental deal that would propel their company to the top of the industry and secure their futures for years. The soft hum of conversations, the clatter of silverware, and the rich scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Everything seemed in place, but an undercurrent of tension ran beneath the surface. "Mark, I'm heading to the restroom for a moment," David said, pushing back his chair from the gleaming mahogany table. Mark, distracted by his phone, gave a brief nod without looking up. As David walked away, a sense of pride welled up within him. Years of relentless effort had brought him to this point, building an empire side by side with Mark. Together, they were about to finalize a deal that would elevate them both. But as David stepped away, something shifted at their table. Sophie, a young waitress who had been serving them, approached to refill Mark's water. She had been working at the cafe for only a short time, always keeping to herself and steering clear of the elite clientele's conversations. But today, something felt different. As she neared the table, she overheard Mark talking quietly into his phone, and her steps faltered. "David has no idea," Mark said in a low voice, confident no one was listening. "Once this deal is done, everything's mine. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late. I've set this up for months, the company, the assets, all of it." Sophie's hands trembled slightly, almost spilling the water as she quickly retreated. Her heart raced. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Mark, David's trusted friend and business partner, was plotting to betray him and take everything they'd built together. Sophie ducked into the kitchen, trying to steady herself. She had no connection to either man beyond serving them coffee, but something tugged at her conscience. Could she really walk away, knowing the devastation that awaited David? A few minutes later, David returned, completely oblivious to the sinister plot that had been revealed while he was away. Mark greeted him with a warm smile, hiding his true intentions. Sophie watched from a distance, her thoughts spinning. Normally, she kept her head down, but this time was different. She couldn't ignore what she knew. An innocent man was about to be destroyed by someone he trusted implicitly. Summoning every ounce of courage, Sophie made a decision. When Mark stepped outside to take another call, she saw her opportunity. Her heart pounding, she walked over to David's table, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, her voice trembling. David looked up, surprised that the waitress was speaking to him directly. "Yes?" His brow furrowed. Sophie hesitated, her pulse racing, but there was no going back now. "I overheard something." "You need to know," she whispered, glancing toward the door where Mark had disappeared. David's frown deepened. "What are you talking about?" "It's your friend, Mark. I think he's planning to betray you. I heard him on the phone. He's going to take everything from you once the deal goes through." David stared at her, stunned by her words. His first instinct was to dismiss what she was saying. This was Mark, his best friend. How could she possibly suggest such a thing? "I'm sorry." "What?" David asked, his voice laced with confusion and disbelief. "I know this sounds crazy, but I swear it's the truth," Sophie pressed on, her tone urgent. "I heard him say it. He's planning to take over your company and leave you with nothing." David's shock slowly gave way to a gnawing sense of suspicion. Could it be true? Could the man he had trusted for so long be plotting against him? His eyes flicked toward the door, where Mark was still talking on the phone. Doubt began to creep into his mind, eroding the confidence he had always had in his friend. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low, searching for clarity. David's tone grew more serious now. Emily nodded, her eyes wide with sincerity. She leaned in slightly, as if to emphasize her words. "I wouldn't tell you this if I wasn't certain." I just couldn't let you go through with the deal without knowing what I overheard." David leaned back in his chair, his mind whirling. He had known Mark since they were kids. They had built this company together from nothing. The idea of Mark betraying him seemed almost impossible to grasp. But something about Emily's expression, the urgency in her voice, made him hesitate. She didn't strike him as the type to fabricate something like this. "Thank you," David said at last, his voice quieter, more reflective. "I appreciate you telling me." Emily nodded once more before stepping away, leaving David alone with his thoughts. A few minutes ago, everything had seemed certain, worth celebrating. Now, it all felt fragile, teetering on the edge of collapse. He glanced down at the contract on the table, doubt clouding his mind. If what Emily said was true, signing this deal could ruin him. He needed to be sure, to find out the truth for himself. As Mark returned to the cafe, grinning as though nothing had changed. One thing became clear to David: he couldn't trust anyone without knowing all the facts. Sitting at the table, David's thoughts spun in a chaotic blur of confusion and suspicion. He watched Mark walk toward him, looking every bit like the loyal friend he had always known. Emily's warning repeated in his head: he's planning to take over your company and leave you with nothing. It was impossible to reconcile this version of Mark, the one sitting before him, with the betrayal Emily had described. "Everything all right?" Mark asked casually as he slid back into his seat, unaware of the inner storm David was battling. David forced a smile, though his gut twisted with unease. "Yeah, just going over the deal." "You know how it is," he replied, keeping his tone steady. Mark nodded, taking a sip of his water. "I get it. Big decisions. But we've been working toward this for years, it's time to make it happen." David nodded absently, his gaze drifting to the papers spread out in front of him. They had spent so much time building this business together. Now, they were on the verge of something even bigger. Yet the words of a stranger, someone he had never met before today, had turned everything upside down. Could Mark really be capable of such a betrayal? The thought gnawed at him, pulling at the trust he had held for so long. "I think I need a bit more time," David said slowly, his eyes still fixed on the contract. Mark's brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of something crossing his face: confusion? Annoyance? David couldn't quite tell, but it only deepened his doubts. "More time?" "David, we've been through this deal for weeks." "We're ready," Mark insisted, his voice carrying a hint of impatience. "I know," David replied, keeping his voice level. "But I just want to make sure everything's in place. There's no harm in double-checking, right?" There was a brief flicker in Mark's expression again, frustration, perhaps, but it vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. "Of course," Mark said, though the smile that followed seemed strained. "Whatever you need. But I think we're in a solid position. This deal could change everything for us." "Exactly," David said, managing another forced smile. "Which is why I need to be certain." Mark leaned back in his chair, acting relaxed, but David could sense the subtle tension between them. "Take your time, but don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come around every day." David nodded, his mind made up. He wasn't signing anything until he uncovered the truth. "I'll let you know soon," he said, standing up to leave. Ryan stayed seated, still smiling, but David couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. There was a new tension, a subtle edge to Ryan's words that hadn't been there before. As David stepped out of the cafe, his mind swirled with suspicion, disbelief, and concern. He didn't want to believe his closest friend could betray him, but he couldn't afford to be naive. Too much was on the line. The cool evening air hit his face as he walked outside. Waiting by the entrance was Emily, her face anxious, biting her lip nervously. She looked up at him as he approached. "Did you talk to him?" she asked quietly, her voice low with concern. David paused, unsure how much to share just yet. "I didn't sign anything," he said, though his tone hinted at the uncertainty still clouding his mind. "But I need to find out more." Emily nodded, visibly relieved. "I was so worried."
I didn't know if you'd believe me." David studied her for a moment. What had motivated her to tell him? She had nothing to gain. "Why did you tell me?" he asked, his curiosity evident.
Emily hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground before she met his eyes again.
"I know it wasn't my place.
I'm just a waitress, but when I overheard what he said, I couldn't let you go through with it without warning you."
It didn't feel right.
Her honesty was disarming. She had no reason to involve herself in his life, but she had taken the risk. David could see that her concern was genuine, and that only added to the confusion swirling in his mind. "I appreciate it," David said at last, his voice quieter now.
"You might have saved me from a huge mistake."
Emily shifted, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm just glad I could help," she mumbled. David nodded, the weight of everything that had happened still heavy on his shoulders. He knew a warning alone wasn't enough. He needed solid proof. "I'm going to hire someone to look into it," he said, almost talking to himself. "I can't make any decisions until I know for sure." Emily looked relieved that he was taking her warning seriously.
"That's probably smart. I hope it's not true.
For your sake." David gave her a small, tight smile.
"Me too."
As he walked away, David pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. There was one person who could help him dig deeper into this situation, a private investigator he'd worked with before. He dialed the number and waited as the line rang. "Julian, it's David Bennett," he said when the familiar voice picked up.
"I've got a situation, and I need your help." Over the next few minutes, David laid out the details of his conversation with Emily and his growing concerns about Ryan. Julian listened carefully, asking a few pointed questions before agreeing to start digging into Ryan's finances right away. "I'll see what I can find," Julian said. "Give me a couple of days."
David hung up, feeling both relieved and anxious. He had taken the first step toward uncovering the truth, but now came the hard part, waiting. As David headed back to his car, he couldn't help but glance over his shoulder, half expecting Ryan to emerge from the cafe, ready to confront him. But the door stayed closed, and the street was quiet. For now, David was in the dark, but soon, he would know everything.
The next few days dragged on, filled with an uneasy anticipation.
Every interaction with Ryan felt different, charged with hidden meanings. Every word, every gesture from his best friend now felt suspect, as though it could be part of the scheme Emily had warned him about. Yet Ryan remained his usual charming self, never showing any sign of deceit. If he was planning something behind David's back, he was doing an exceptional job of hiding it. Meanwhile, Julian was hard at work, digging into Ryan's financial records. David had only used Julian's services a few times in the past for sensitive business matters, but the investigator had always been thorough. Now, that thoroughness was critical. As the days went by, David forced himself to carry on as though nothing had changed. He met with Ryan for their usual business discussions, attended board meetings, and even went out for drinks with him to maintain appearances. But behind the casual facade, David's mind buzzed with suspicion. He watched Ryan closely, searching for any slip-up, any indication that Emily's warning was real. Yet Ryan continued to be the same affable, confident partner he had always been, which only deepened David's internal conflict. On the third day, David's phone rang. It was Julian. "I've got something," Julian said, his voice steady but serious. "It's not a lot, but it's a start." David straightened up in his chair. "What did you find?" "There are some irregularities in Ryan's accounts," Julian explained. "A few unexplained transfers over the past few months. He's been moving money into an offshore account. It's not illegal on its own, but the timing is interesting. It started around the time you two began negotiating this deal." David's heart sank. David's stomach clenched. "How much money are we talking about?" "Not huge sums, but enough to raise questions," Julian responded. "I'm still piecing things together, but it's clear Ryan's been setting something up behind the scenes." David leaned back, running a hand through his hair.
Do you think it's tied to what Emily overheard? It's possible, Julian replied.
People don't move money offshore for no reason. It's usually to hide something or prepare for a major shift.
My guess?
He's positioning himself for a big move after the deal goes through. David closed his eyes, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him.
Emily had been right. Ryan was up to something, and if Julian's suspicions were correct, it was worse than he'd initially feared. Keep digging, David finally said. I need more than just suspicions. I need solid proof. I'll keep you updated, Julian promised before hanging up. David set the phone down and gazed out the large office window.
The city skyline sprawled before him, but it did little to ease his turbulent thoughts.
How had it come to this?
Ryan had stood by him through every high and low. Together, they had built their empire from the ground up. They had celebrated their victories and mourned their setbacks together. And now, it seemed that Ryan had been plotting behind his back, setting things in motion to take over the company they had built side by side.
David's anger began to simmer.
He had trusted Ryan with everything. They had shared a vision, a future. The idea that Ryan would betray him just to secure a bigger share of the rewards was almost unthinkable.
Almost. The anger only grew when David recalled the way Ryan had spoken at the cafe, the casual confidence as he discussed taking everything from him. How long had Ryan felt this way? How long had he harbored this envy, all while pretending to be David's closest friend? That evening, David met Ryan for dinner, something they did regularly to discuss business in a more relaxed setting. But tonight, David's pulse raced under the weight of what he now knew.
When he arrived, Ryan was already seated, greeting David with his usual easy smile. But as David sat across from him, he saw Ryan in a new light. This wasn't just his friend anymore, this was a man who had been plotting to take everything from him. They exchanged pleasantries, discussed the day's meetings, and tossed around ideas for new business opportunities. Ryan, ever the charmer, spoke of their shared future with the same confidence he always had, as if nothing had changed.
So, what's the latest on the deal? Ryan asked casually between bites of steak. Still on track? David hesitated, studying Ryan's face before replying.
I'm still reviewing a few things, he said, keeping his tone neutral.
I just want to make sure everything's in order before we finalize. Ryan's eyes flickered briefly. Was it impatience or something else?
But then his smile returned. Of course, he said smoothly.
No rush. I just don't want us to miss out on this opportunity.
David nodded, outwardly calm, but inside, he was boiling.
How could Ryan sit there, pretending everything was fine, knowing what he had planned? Knowing he intended to take everything they had worked for?
The rest of the dinner passed without incident, but David's resolve was hardening.
He couldn't confront Ryan yet, not until Julian had found concrete evidence.
But deep down, David knew their friendship was already over. There was no coming back from this.
That night, David lay awake, staring at the ceiling.
Emily's warning had saved him from making the biggest mistake of his life, but now, he needed to figure out how to protect what was his without alerting Ryan to his suspicions. Ryan was playing a dangerous game, and David needed to be ready for whatever came next. The next morning, David woke with the same heaviness in his chest that had settled there since his dinner with Ryan. He replayed every detail, the smiles, the reassurances, the flashes of impatience.
How long had Ryan been plotting? How long had he been working behind the scenes to take it all away? By midday, David's phone rang. It was Julian.
His heart raced as he answered, a mix of dread and anticipation flooding him. David, Julian began, his voice steady but serious.
I found something. Measured but carrying a weight of urgency. I've uncovered more. I think we're looking at the full picture now.
David sat up straighter in his chair.
What did you find? There's been a pattern of transactions over the past year, Julian explained.
Money being funneled out of the company in small, carefully planned increments, just below the threshold that would raise any internal alarms.
It's clear Ryan's been moving these funds into a personal offshore account. He's already siphoned off more than you realize. David's stomach lurched. How much? Millions, Julian replied bluntly.
Close to 5 million, all hidden in accounts that would have been almost impossible to trace if we hadn't caught this early. He's been setting this up for a long time, David. David felt the floor fall out from under him.
$5 million.
It was more than just a financial betrayal, it was the realization that Ryan had been orchestrating this behind his back for over a year.
He wasn't just exploiting an opportunity. This had been a cold, calculated effort to bring David down. Julian continued.
I also found communication suggesting Ryan has been in contact with some of your competitors. It looks like he's positioning himself for a major play, possibly to take full control of the company once this deal goes through. If you had signed the papers, you would have been handing everything over to him.
David's blood ran cold.
All the signs had been there, but he had ignored them, blinded by trust and their years of friendship. Ryan had been laying the groundwork for months, building connections, diverting funds, all while preparing to seize control.
And David hadn't seen any of it.
David, you need to act fast, Julian said, his voice firm.
This isn't just some bad business decisions, this is deliberate, calculated fraud.
If you don't stop him now, he's going to make his move.
David gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. What do we do?
He asked, though his mind was already racing with ideas.
Julian remained calm.
First, you need to freeze the accounts he's been using.
We have enough evidence to justify it.
Then, you confront him, but do it strategically. Don't let him know how much you have on him until you're ready to make your move. David nodded, his mind running through the logistics.
I'll talk to my legal team right away.
I need to make sure the company's protected before I confront him.
Good, Julian replied. I'll send over all the documentation I've gathered.
You'll have everything you need to back this up legally. After the call ended, David sat back, staring at the ceiling for a moment. It was a lot to process: Ryan, the money, the betrayal. A full year of deception while David had trusted him without question. The rage simmered just beneath the surface, but he knew he couldn't let it cloud his judgment. Ryan wasn't just a friend-turned-traitor, he was a strategic, formidable opponent. But now, David had the upper hand. David quickly called his legal team, detailing everything Julian had uncovered. His attorneys immediately began drafting the necessary paperwork to freeze the accounts and prevent Ryan from siphoning off any more funds. For the first time in days, David felt a surge of relief. At least, for now, he could stop Ryan from causing further damage. But that relief was short-lived.
The next step would be the confrontation. David knew it wouldn't be easy.
Ryan was clever, manipulative, and, worst of all, still unaware that David was onto him.
As the day wore on, David's resolve solidified.
He would confront Ryan, but it had to be on his terms. Ryan had been playing this game for over a year, and David had to be prepared for whatever came next. That evening, David arranged to meet Ryan at a private office they often used for confidential discussions. The space felt right, neutral, professional, and away from any prying eyes. Ryan arrived on time, greeting David with his usual easy charm, a smile that now felt like poison. "Hey, man," Ryan said, walking in with a grin. "I've been thinking about the deal, how close we are to making it official." David forced himself to remain calm, gesturing toward the chairs.
"Have a seat. We need to talk."
Ryan's smile faltered slightly as he sat down, sensing the tension in the room.
"What's going on? Something wrong?"
David stared at him, a flood of memories washing over him, their years of friendship, their partnership. And yet here he was, facing the harsh reality that the man sitting across from him had been plotting to destroy everything they had built together. "I know everything, Ryan," David said finally, his voice steady but thick with anger. "The offshore accounts, the money you've been stealing, the conversations with our competitors."
Face a mask of fury and panic.
He was scrambling, his confident facade completely shattered. For a moment, he just stood there, seething, his mind racing for a way out. But David could see it. Ryan knew he had lost.
"You don't understand," Ryan snarled, trying to regain control. "You think you can just shut me down? I still have people in my corner. You think this is the end, but it's not. I'm not going down that easily." David shook his head, his voice unwavering. "It is the end, Ryan.
The accounts are frozen, the legal team is prepared, and the evidence is undeniable. You've betrayed me, the company, and now you're scrambling because you know it's over." Ryan's breathing grew heavier, the weight of his failure sinking in. For the first time, the reality of his situation was clear to him. His grand plan, meticulously plotted for over a year, had collapsed in front of him. David took a step forward, his eyes locked on Ryan's.
"I trusted you with everything, Ryan. We built this from nothing, together. And this is how you repay that trust? By stabbing me in the back?"
Ryan clenched his fists, but the rage in his eyes was now mixed with desperation.
"You think you're so righteous, David," he spat. "But you've always looked down on me, always seen me as lesser. You never treated me like an equal. I had to take what was owed to me." David's face hardened, his patience gone. "I never saw you as lesser. We were partners. But what you've done, Ryan, this is unforgivable. You've destroyed everything because you couldn't handle your own insecurities."
Ryan glared at him, his chest heaving, his world unraveling. "I had no choice," he muttered bitterly.
"You left me no choice." David shook his head, disgusted. "There was always a choice, Ryan. You just made the wrong one."
For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of their fractured friendship hanging heavy between them. Ryan's anger had cooled into something darker: resignation. He had lost control of the situation, and there was no recovering from it.
"You think this is over?"
Ryan finally muttered, his voice low, dangerous.
"It's not. This isn't the last you'll hear from me."
David stood his ground, his gaze unflinching.
"Do whatever you think you need to, but you're done here.
The company, the people we've worked with for years, they'll know the truth now. You'll be lucky if you aren't facing legal charges for fraud."
Ryan's face twisted with rage, but deep down, he knew David was right.
There was no saving his scheme. His reputation was ruined, his accounts frozen, and his last-ditch efforts had failed.
David stepped back, his resolve firm. "This is over, Ryan.
You made your choices, and now you'll have to live with the consequences." Ryan stared at him, defeated but still burning with resentment. Without another word, he stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him. David stood there for a moment, the tension in the room slowly dissipating.
He exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the confrontation finally lift.
It wasn't the victory he had wanted, but it was necessary. The man he once called his friend was gone, replaced by someone driven by greed and jealousy.
As he walked back to his desk, David knew that the battle wasn't over yet.
There would be fallout: legal battles, rebuilding trust, and repairing the damage Ryan had caused. But now, at least, he could move forward.
He picked up his phone, dialing Julian once more. "It's done. Ryan's gone, but now we need to clean up the mess." Julian's calm voice came through the line. "We'll handle it, David. One step at a time."
David nodded to himself, finally feeling a sense of clarity.
One step at a time.
As if unsure of what to expect,
David took a moment, gathering his thoughts before speaking.
He had rehearsed this conversation in his mind on the way over, but sitting in Emily's modest home made the words feel heavier, more significant. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but sincere, "I couldn't just let what you did go without saying something.
You saved me. Without your warning, I would have signed that deal, and Ryan would have taken everything. You risked a lot to come forward, and I don't take that lightly."
Emily looked down, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "I was just doing what anyone else would have done," she replied softly, but David could see in her eyes that she didn't entirely believe that. "No," he said firmly, "you didn't have to get involved.
You could have walked away and kept your head down. But you didn't.
You did the right thing, even when it wasn't easy, and that means something. She met his gaze, her expression softening.
I couldn't let you get betrayed like that. It wasn't right. I just couldn't stay silent. David nodded, deeply moved by her integrity. I want to do something for you, Emily. You've changed the course of my life, and I want to make sure you're recognized for that. You've done more than you realize.
Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat.
Mr. Sullivan, I don't need anything. Really. I'm glad I could help.
David smiled, but he wasn't about to let her dismiss her own courage.
I know you didn't do this for a reward. That's exactly why you deserve it. But I want to offer you something that could help you in your future. How would you feel about coming to work for me? I know you've got a good head on your shoulders, and someone like you could make a real difference at my company. Emily's eyes widened, caught completely off guard by the offer. Work for you? I don't know what to say. Say yes, David replied, a warm smile spreading across his face. I'm not offering out of charity, Emily. I believe in rewarding the kind of integrity and bravery you've shown. You have more potential than you realize, and I'd be lucky to have you on my team.
She looked at him, speechless for a moment, her eyes flicking around the room as if she needed to make sure this was real.
I don't know anything about your business, Mr. Sullivan.
You'll learn, David said reassuringly.
You've already proven you've got the instincts.
I'll make sure you get the training and the support you need.
It's a real offer, Emily. Take your time to think about it, but know that I mean it. Emily sat back, still processing everything. I don't know what to say. Thank you. It's more than I ever expected.
David leaned forward slightly, his tone soft but sincere. You've already helped me more than you know, Emily.
Now, let me help you.
She smiled then, a small, grateful smile, still unsure of what the future held but touched by his gesture.
I'll think about it. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. David nodded, standing to leave. Take your time, Emily. And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me.
As he walked out of her small home, David felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in days. He had faced betrayal, but he had also found an unexpected ally in Emily. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with legal battles and rebuilding trust, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't facing it alone. And with someone like Emily by his side, perhaps there was a silver lining to be found after all.
Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. It's more than I ever imagined.
David leaned forward slightly, his voice soft but firm.
You don't need to thank me, Emily. You earned this. You stepped in when it mattered most, and that kind of courage, it's rare. I just want to give you the chance to fulfill your own potential, the same way you've helped me. Emily wiped away a tear, trying to gather her thoughts. I don't know if I deserve all of this. I was just doing what felt right. David shook his head gently. You deserve every bit of it. I see something special in you, Emily. And if anyone deserves the opportunity to go after their dreams, it's you.
She sat there for a moment, processing everything, her heart racing. The idea of going back to school, of working with David, seemed like a dream one she hadn't allowed herself to hope for in a long time. I don't know how to thank you, she finally said, her voice quiet but full of sincerity. But I'd love to take the chance to finish school. It's something I thought I'd never be able to do. David smiled warmly, the weight of the past few days lifting just a little.
Then it's settled.
We'll work out the details, but consider your education taken care of. And the offer for the position still stands, take your time to decide, but I'd be honored to have you on my team. Emily nodded, her eyes still shimmering with emotion but filled with a newfound hope.
I'll think about it. I can't believe this is happening. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Really, thank you.
David stood, extending his hand toward her.
It's David. And you don't need to thank me, this is just the beginning for you.
Emily smiled, shaking his hand, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. As David walked out of her home, she sat for a moment in disbelief, overwhelmed but excited for what the future might hold. For the first time in a long time, she could see a path forward, one filled with opportunity, growth, and the knowledge that she wasn't facing it alone. The nervousness in her eyes.
And I've made a decision.
David leaned forward slightly, his expression encouraging.
Take your time, Emily. Whatever you decide, I know it'll be the right choice for you.
She took a deep breath, her hands tightening for a moment before she continued.
I want to accept your offer.
Both of them, actually, she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. I want to go back to school, and I'd love the opportunity to work at your company. David's face broke into a warm smile, a wave of pride and relief washing over him.
That's wonderful, Emily. I'm really glad to hear it.
You're making the right choice, and I'm excited to see what you'll accomplish. Emily exhaled slowly, the weight of her decision beginning to settle. It's a little overwhelming, she admitted with a soft chuckle.
But I know this is what I want. I want to make something of myself.
David nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment.
I won't lie, it's going to be challenging.
But you've already shown me that you can handle tough situations.
You've got the instincts and the drive.
I believe in you, and I'll make sure you have the support you need both in school and at the company. Emily's nervousness began to fade, replaced by a quiet determination.
Thank you, David.
I can't begin to explain how much this means to me. I've been taking care of my mom for so long, and
I just didn't think something like this would ever be possible. David smiled, standing up and extending his hand. It's not just possible, Emily. It's happening. And I'm honored to have you as part of the team.
Emily stood as well, shaking his hand, her grip firm.
I won't let you down.
I know you won't, David said, his voice filled with certainty.
We'll take it step by step.
For now, focus on getting back to school. We'll work around your schedule, and once you're ready, we'll bring you on board. As Emily left his office that day, David watched her go with a sense of satisfaction and hope. Her journey was just beginning, and he knew she was about to embark on something extraordinary. For both of them, it marked the start of a new chapter, one shaped by courage, resilience, and the determination to rise above the past. As David returned to his desk, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he'd come since Ryan's betrayal. What had started as a period of darkness and uncertainty was now transforming into something brighter, thanks in large part to Emily's bravery. She had given him more than just a warning, she had reignited his faith in people, and in the power of doing the right thing. David smiled to himself as he picked up his pen and continued his work. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And fast-paced decision-making.
But Emily was determined, and her work ethic quickly shone through. With Sandra's guidance and David's unwavering support, she gradually grew more confident in her new role.
The first few weeks were overwhelming as Emily juggled her job with her return to school. Late nights became the norm as she pored over textbooks and tackled assignments, all while learning the ins and outs of her position at the company. But for the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose, a clear direction for her future. David checked in on her regularly, making sure she had the resources she needed and encouraging her at every step. It wasn't just a professional relationship, it was clear David cared about her personal growth and success. Emily felt an immense sense of gratitude, not just for the opportunities he had given her, but for the belief he had placed in her from the start. One afternoon, a few months into her new role, Emily was sitting in her office going over a financial report when Sandra stopped by.
"You're doing really well, you know that?" Sandra said, smiling warmly as she sat down across from her. Emily looked up, slightly surprised. "Thanks. It's been
a lot to take in, but I'm learning every day."
Sandra nodded. "That's how it works. But you've got the right mindset, and everyone can see how dedicated you are. David's noticed too, he's been really impressed.
Emily felt a flush of pride. She had been working hard, but hearing that her efforts were being recognized by David and others made it all the more rewarding. "I just want to do my best," she said, smiling shyly. "And you are," Sandra replied, standing to leave. "Keep it up, and there's no limit to what you can achieve here." After Sandra left, Emily sat back in her chair, reflecting on how much her life had changed in such a short time. The cafe felt like a lifetime ago, and the timid girl who had been afraid to speak up seemed like a distant memory. Now, she was contributing to major decisions, analyzing financial reports, and balancing school with a career she never thought she would have. That evening, as she left the office and walked out into the cool night air, Emily thought about everything that had brought her here. It had all started with a simple act of courage, the decision to warn David about Ryan's betrayal. That choice had set her life on a new course, one that was filled with challenges but also endless opportunities. As she looked up at the city skyline, Emily allowed herself to smile. For the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape. And for the first time, she was ready to embrace it fully. To rest and recharge too. "Balance is important, even for someone as dedicated as you," he said with a warm smile. Emily chuckled, closing the folder she had been working on. "I'll keep that in mind," she replied, gathering her things. "But I really enjoy the work, it doesn't even feel like a burden." David's eyes softened, seeing her passion and commitment shine through. "I'm glad to hear that. Just don't forget to take care of yourself along the way. You're an important part of this team, and we need you at your best." As Emily packed up her belongings, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. David's words were more than just encouragement, they reflected the value she now brought to the company. It was moments like this that made her realize how far she had come from the cafe, where she used to wonder if her dreams would ever materialize. Now, she was living those dreams, with the support of people like David who believed in her potential. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice sincere. "I really appreciate everything you've done for me." David gave her a small nod, his expression thoughtful. "You've earned every bit of it, Emily. Remember that." With that, he turned to leave, and Emily couldn't help but feel a surge of pride and gratitude. She wasn't just an employee, she was valued, respected, and making a difference. As the office lights dimmed and the quiet settled around her, Emily walked out into the night, feeling more confident than ever in her abilities. The path ahead was still full of challenges, but with each step, she was proving that she belonged. And as she continued to grow in her role, she knew that this was only the beginning of what she could achieve. Smiled, still processing the enormity of the opportunity in front of her. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice soft but filled with determination. "I'm truly honored. I promise, I won't let you down." David stood, extending his hand toward her. "It's David," he reminded her with a warm smile. "And I know you won't. I'm confident that you're going to make this project a success." Emily shook his hand, feeling a sense of pride and purpose. This was a pivotal moment, one that marked a huge leap forward in her career. She had come so far from the quiet waitress who overheard a conversation that changed her life, and now she was being entrusted with leading a major company initiative. As she left David's office, her thoughts raced. She had been given the chance of a lifetime, a leadership role, the chance to work directly with David, and the responsibility of overseeing an expansion into a new market. It was exciting and terrifying all at once, but she knew deep down that she was ready for it. Over the next few days, Emily reflected on how far she had come. The corporate world had once felt so distant, but now, she was making decisions, offering insights, and shaping the company's future. With Sandra's guidance and David's mentorship, she had found her place in this new world. The weekend gave Emily a rare moment to breathe and process what lay ahead. She spent time with her mother, who had been her anchor through everything. and allowed herself to enjoy the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had earned her success. The fear and doubt that once held her back had slowly been replaced with confidence and ambition. When Monday arrived, Emily returned to the office with renewed focus. She and David began planning the new project, diving into strategy sessions and financial analyses. Emily quickly saw that this wasn't just another project, it was a game changer for the company, and she was at the center of it. As they worked together, David continued to trust her instincts, encouraging her to take the lead on key decisions. Every day was a new challenge, but Emily embraced each one with a mix of excitement and determination. Weeks passed, and the project started taking shape. Emily's leadership was noticed by her colleagues, and her ability to navigate the complexities of the new market impressed even the most seasoned executives. She was no longer just the young woman who had once served coffee at a cafe, she was now an integral part of the company's future. One afternoon, after a particularly successful strategy meeting, David turned to her and said, "I knew from the moment you stepped into this company that you were going to make a difference. You've exceeded even my expectations, Emily." She smiled, humbled by the compliment, but also filled with pride. "Thank you, David. I couldn't have done any of this without your belief in me." David shook his head. "I gave you the opportunity, but you're the one who made it all happen. This company is better because of you." As they continued to move forward with the expansion, Emily knew that this was just the beginning. The lessons she had learned, the challenges she had faced, and the people who had supported her along the way had all prepared her for this moment. And now, as she looked ahead, she could see a future filled with possibility, one that she was ready to embrace fully. For the first time in her life, Emily truly believed there were no limits to what she could achieve. And with David's trust and the opportunities ahead of her, she was determined to reach heights she had never even dreamed possible. Trusted private investigator. The weight of the past months hung heavily on him: Ryan's betrayal, the legal battles, the progress they had made since. He thought they were past this, moving forward, but the sudden reappearance of something connected to Ryan brought back a sense of unease. David took a deep breath, still contemplating what to do. His first instinct was to call Julian, to let the professionals handle whatever this was. But a part of him needed to know what was on the drive. He felt responsible for whatever fallout might come from Ryan's latest move, and the curiosity gnawed at him. After a moment's hesitation, David plugged the USB drive into his computer. The device lit up, and a single file appeared on the screen. Its name was simple: For David. ***, his hand hovered over the mouse, his heart pounding as he clicked to open the file. It was a video. The screen flickered to life, and there, sitting behind a desk in what appeared to be a dimly lit room, was Ryan. David's stomach tightened. "David," Ryan's voice began, his expression a mix of bitterness and cold calculation. "If you're watching this, then you've probably thought you won. You've frozen my accounts, cut me off, and moved on with your little projects." Ryan paused, his eyes dark with resentment. "But I'm not done yet. You've underestimated me." David's pulse quickened as Ryan continued. "You see, while you were focused on shutting me out, I was setting something else in motion. I've been planning this for a long time, and you're not going to stop it. This isn't just about the company anymore. I'm going to make sure you lose everything: your reputation, your deals, and that shiny new project you've got going." Ryan leaned forward, his face filling the screen. "I've made sure that some very important people have access to some very damaging information. You're not untouchable, David. And when everything crashes down, remember I warned you." The video ended abruptly, leaving David staring at the blank screen, his mind racing. What kind of damaging information was Ryan talking about? And who had Ryan been dealing with? David felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, his mind already piecing together what had to happen next. He couldn't ignore this. Ryan wasn't bluffing, he never had been. Quickly, David dialed Julian's number. As soon as the private investigator picked up, David's voice was steady but urgent. "Julian, it's David.
We've got a situation. Ryan's back, and he's made another move. I need you to look into something immediately.
Julian listened carefully as David explained the video and Ryan's cryptic threats. His tone was calm but serious. I'll start digging into this right away, David.
We'll find out what he's up to.
After hanging up, David sat back in his chair, his mind racing.
Ryan had clearly been working behind the scenes, setting up something far bigger than a mere financial takeover.
This was personal now, and David knew he had to act fast. Later that evening, after informing his legal team and making contingency plans, David called Emily into his office. As she stepped in, he could see the concern on her face, she could sense the tension.
What's going on, David?
She asked, taking a seat across from him.
David didn't sugarcoat it. Ryan's made a move.
He sent me a USB drive with a video threatening to ruin everything, our project, the company, everything. Emily's face paled slightly, but her eyes steeled with determination.
What do we do?
David leaned forward, meeting her gaze.
We don't let him win.
I've already contacted Julian to investigate, and I'm going to make sure our team is prepared for anything.
But I'm going to need your help more than ever. Ryan's playing dirty, and we have to be ready for anything he throws our way.
Emily nodded, her resolve firm.
Whatever you need, I'm here.
We've come too far to let him tear it all down. As David looked at her, he felt a renewed sense of determination. Together, they had already faced incredible challenges, and they weren't about to let Ryan's last-ditch efforts succeed.
With Ryan's looming threat, the road ahead would be tougher than ever.
But David knew one thing for certain: with people like Emily by his side, he was ready to fight for everything they had built and win. Of gratitude for her support. Right now, just being here helps, he said, his voice softer but still strained with tension.
Julian's on it, trying to trace the video and figure out what Ryan's planning. But until we know more, it feels like we're in a holding pattern.
Emily nodded, her brow furrowed with concern.
He's trying to rattle you. I know it's hard, but you've always been careful. Whatever he's claiming, it might not be as bad as he's making it sound.
David sighed, leaning back in his chair.
I hope you're right.
But even if it's just rumors or half-truths, it could still do damage. The media loves a scandal, and Ryan's banking on that.
Emily's expression grew more determined.
We'll get through this. You've already faced him once and came out on top.
We'll do it again.
Her confidence bolstered David, and he found himself calming down slightly. He had trusted Emily's judgment before, and now, with her unwavering support, he felt less alone in this storm.
Thank you, Emily, he said quietly.
I don't know what I'd do without you by my side through all of this.
Emily gave a small, reassuring smile. You don't have to go through it alone.
As they sat there in the quiet office, a sense of resolve settled over David. Ryan's threats were serious, but he had people around him: Julian, his legal team, and Emily, who had his back. Together, they would find a way to counter whatever Ryan was planning. The following day, Julian called with the first bit of good news.
David, we traced the video. Ryan's in a small hotel just outside the city. It's nothing fancy, but we've got eyes on him now. We're looking into who he's been in contact with.
David felt a flicker of relief.
Good. At least we know where he is. Keep digging, Julian.
I need to know if he's reached out to the media yet.
Will do. I'll let you know as soon as we have more. Hanging up the phone, David leaned back in his chair. Ryan's location gave them an advantage, but the uncertainty of what he was holding over David's head still loomed.
It was a waiting game now, and that made David uneasy. Later that afternoon, David called a meeting with his legal team to discuss potential damage control. We need to prepare for the worst, he said, his voice firm.
If Ryan's planning to go public, we need to be ready with a response. I want contingency plans in place for whatever he might release. The lawyers nodded, already strategizing.
We'll have statements prepared, one of them said. And if the claims are baseless, We can pursue legal action against him for defamation." David nodded, feeling slightly more in control. But it was still a delicate situation, and he knew they had to tread carefully. As the hours passed and the anticipation continued to gnaw at him, Emily stopped by his office again.
"Any updates?"
she asked, her voice steady.
"Julian found Ryan's location," David replied, "but no word yet on whether he's reached out to the press."
Emily sat down, her eyes thoughtful.
"Have you considered going on the offensive?"
"If Ryan's threatening to go public, maybe you should control the narrative before he can." David raised an eyebrow, intrigued.
"You mean
get ahead of whatever he's planning?"
Emily nodded.
"If you make a public statement first, something transparent but not defensive, it could take the wind out of his sails."
"He's expecting you to react."
"But if you're the one setting the tone, he might lose some of his leverage." David considered her words. It was a bold idea, but it made sense.
"That's risky." "But it could work," he said, a glimmer of hope entering his voice. "If we control the story, Ryan's move might fall flat."
"I believe in you, David," Emily said, her voice firm.
"You've always been ahead of the game. Don't let him pull you down into his. Set your own terms."
With that, David felt a shift in his mindset. He wasn't going to sit back and wait for Ryan to attack. He was going to take control. "Thank you, Emily," he said again, his resolve hardening.
"Let's do this." Control.
The fear and uncertainty that had plagued him for days were slowly giving way to a new kind of resolve. Ryan had played his hand, but it wasn't enough.
The lies, the deception, the desperate attempts to ruin him, it was all unraveling.
And now, David had the upper hand. The next morning, David arrived at the office early, his mind clearer than it had been in weeks. Emily, as always, was already there, going over reports at her desk. She looked up as David entered and gave him a reassuring smile.
"Good news?"
she asked, sensing the shift in his demeanor. David nodded, feeling lighter for the first time in days.
"Julian's team found out that Ryan's story is all built on lies.
He's been fabricating everything, trying to sell a false narrative to the media. But we've gotten ahead of him, and we're ready to take him down legally and publicly."
Emily's eyes brightened with relief.
"That's incredible. I knew you'd find a way to stop him."
"Couldn't have done it without everyone's support," David said, looking at her with genuine gratitude. "Especially you, Emily. You've been steady through all of this, keeping everything running while I dealt with, well, all of this."
Emily smiled, but her expression softened with understanding.
"That's what I'm here for. We've been through a lot, but I always knew you'd come out stronger."
David appreciated her unwavering faith in him.
"We're about to file the lawsuit against Ryan. It's going to end soon." As the day wore on, the preparations for the lawsuit moved quickly.
The legal team drafted the necessary documents, filing claims for defamation, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The evidence they had accumulated, financial records, Ryan's offshore accounts, and now his attempt to smear David, was overwhelming.
Ryan's web of deceit had finally caught up to him.
A few days later, David's legal team issued a public statement, not only outlining the lawsuit but also revealing Ryan's betrayal. The media outlets that Ryan had contacted were quick to retract any interest in his fabricated story once they learned the truth. The tables had turned completely, and Ryan's credibility was shattered. David felt a deep sense of satisfaction as he watched the story unfold. Ryan had pushed him to the edge, but in the end, the truth had prevailed. Later that evening, David stood by the large office windows, gazing out at the city skyline as the sun began to set. It felt symbolic, like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another.
Emily knocked on the door softly, stepping inside. "How are you feeling?"
she asked, her tone gentle but curious.
David smiled, feeling the weight of everything finally lifting. "Relieved. Grateful. I didn't think it would be this hard, but we made it."
Emily stood beside him, looking out at the skyline with him.
"You did what you had to do. You fought back, and you won. And now, it's over. David nodded. It is. Ryan won't be a threat anymore.
They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both of them reflecting on everything that had happened. The challenges they had faced, the threats, the betrayals, it had all been overwhelming, but they had come through it together. "Thank you," David said quietly, glancing at Emily.
"I couldn't have done any of this without you."
Emily smiled, her eyes filled with warmth.
"We're a team, David. And this is just the beginning."
David looked out at the horizon, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded him for months. The future was wide open, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't worried about what came next. With the right people by his side, there was nothing he couldn't overcome. As the sun dipped below the skyline, David knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them. Ryan was in the past now, and the future, bright and full of promise, was his to shape. Expected. The storm that had raged around him for months had finally subsided, leaving behind a clarity and purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. Ryan's attempt to tear him down had failed spectacularly, and now, for the first time in months, David could look ahead without the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. As the company returned to its normal pace, David found himself more focused and determined than ever. The expansion project was moving forward rapidly under Emily's leadership, and each day brought new successes. Her sharp insights, paired with David's strategic guidance, had set them on a path toward unprecedented growth. One afternoon, while reviewing some market reports, David caught himself thinking about how much had changed. He glanced up to see Emily working diligently at her desk across the hall, her focus unwavering. She had come a long way from the quiet waitress who had warned him about Ryan's betrayal. Now, she was a cornerstone of the company, a partner in every sense of the word. David stood and walked over to her desk. She looked up from her work, smiling when she saw him.
"Everything all right?" she asked. David nodded, leaning against the edge of her desk. "Better than all right. I was just thinking about everything we've been through. How far we've come."
Emily tilted her head, her smile widening.
"It's been quite the journey, hasn't it?" David chuckled. "To say the least. But through it all, I'm glad we've faced it together. I don't think I've ever relied on anyone as much as I have on you these past months." Emily's eyes softened. "You've done the same for me, David. I'm not just saying that. You've given me more than I ever thought possible." They shared a quiet moment, both reflecting on the battles they'd fought and the victories they'd won, not just against Ryan, but in their personal and professional growth. The challenges had forged an unshakable bond between them, one built on trust, respect, and a shared determination to succeed. David straightened up, his mind already racing ahead. "There's still so much to do. The expansion project is just the beginning. I think we're poised for something bigger than either of us imagined." Emily nodded, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "I agree. There's no limit to what we can achieve now." David smiled, feeling that familiar sense of purpose reigniting. "Then let's get to work. Together, I think we can take this company to places we never thought possible." As Emily returned to her work, David walked back to his office, feeling an overwhelming sense of confidence. They had weathered the storm, faced down betrayal, and emerged stronger for it. And now, as they looked toward the future, there was nothing standing in their way. With Ryan defeated and their bond stronger than ever, David knew one thing for certain: whatever challenges lay ahead, he and Emily would face them together, and they would win. Skipping a beat as David's words sank in. A permanent leadership role? She had never expected something like this, not so soon, and certainly not to the extent David was offering. I don't know what to say," Emily stammered, her mind racing with excitement and disbelief. "This is more than I ever imagined." David smiled, his eyes filled with warmth and pride. "You've earned it, Emily. You've been a crucial part of our success, and it's time we officially recognize that. Your leadership during the expansion project has been nothing short of extraordinary,
and your insight has been invaluable.
The company wouldn't be where it is today without you." Emily's heart swelled with emotion. She had worked so hard, and the idea that David and the rest of the team saw her as an integral part of the company's future meant everything. "I'm honored," she finally said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'd be thrilled to take on this role. I promise I won't let you down." David's smile widened. "I know you won't. You've shown time and again that you're ready for this.
The team already respects and admires you, and with you in this new role, I'm confident we'll be able to achieve even more than we thought possible."
Emily nodded, still processing the enormity of the opportunity in front of her. "Thank you, David. For believing in me, for everything. I couldn't have asked for a better mentor, or a better team."
David stood and extended his hand, a gesture that felt more symbolic now.
"Welcome to the executive team, Emily. I'm excited to see what we'll accomplish together."
Emily stood and shook his hand, her smile reflecting the gratitude and determination she felt inside.
"I'm excited too. Let's make this next chapter even better than the last."
As Emily left his office, a sense of accomplishment and purpose filled her. She had come so far from where she had started, and now she had a seat at the table, one she had earned through hard work, integrity, and resilience. The future looked brighter than ever, and for the first time, Emily truly felt like she belonged in every sense of the word. She wasn't just part of the company, she was shaping its future. And with David and the rest of the team by her side, she knew they could take on anything that came their way.
The room.
He smiled warmly as he looked out at the gathered employees, the people who had worked hard to bring the company to where it was now. "Good evening, everyone," David began, his voice carrying easily over the murmurs of the crowd. "Tonight, we're here to celebrate something incredible, the successful completion of our expansion project. This has been a huge effort, and I couldn't be prouder of the work each of you has put in. We've faced challenges, but we've emerged stronger and more united than ever." The crowd applauded, a sense of camaraderie filling the room.
"But tonight," David continued, his eyes scanning the room until they found Emily, "we're not just here to celebrate the company's achievements.
We're also here to recognize someone who has gone above and beyond, someone who has become an essential part of our success." Emily felt her heart skip a beat, her cheeks flushing slightly as she realized what was coming next. "I'd like to take a moment to honor Emily Adams," David said, his voice filled with genuine pride. "She has shown exceptional leadership, vision, and dedication throughout this project, and it's time we officially recognize her contributions." The room burst into applause as David gestured for Emily to join him on the stage. Her nerves fluttered, but there was also a deep sense of accomplishment swelling within her. This was her moment, a moment that symbolized just how far she had come. As she walked toward the stage, David continued speaking. "Emily started with us in an unexpected way, but from the very beginning, she proved that she has what it takes to lead. Her ideas and integrity have made this company stronger. And I am proud to announce that she will be joining our senior management team as the new head of international operations." The applause grew louder, and Emily felt a rush of emotion as she stepped onto the stage. David extended his hand, and she shook it, her eyes brimming with gratitude and pride. "Thank you, David," she said softly, turning to the crowd. "This is an honor I never expected, but I'm deeply grateful. This company has become my home, and I promise to give everything I have to continue driving us forward. I couldn't have done any of this without the support of all of you, and I look forward to working with you in this new role." The applause swelled again, and Emily felt a wave of warmth and encouragement from the people around her. As she stepped down from the stage, the weight of her new responsibilities settled on her, but it was a weight she was ready to carry. That night, as the celebration continued, Emily found herself surrounded by her colleagues, all congratulating her on the promotion. There was still so much work ahead, but she no longer felt the uncertainty that had once plagued her. She belonged here. And with David's guidance and the support of her team, she knew she was ready for whatever came next. As the evening wound down, Emily caught David's eye from across the room. He gave her a nod, a small, quiet acknowledgement of everything they had been through together. It was a look that said, "We did this together." And as she smiled back, Emily knew that this was just the beginning of an even brighter future. The storms of the past were behind them, and ahead lay endless possibilities. As Emily stood there, gazing out over the quiet office and the twinkling city skyline beyond, a deep sense of fulfillment washed over her. The path that had brought her here, from a waitress overhearing a conversation to now leading international operations, was nothing short of extraordinary. She had faced adversity, taken risks, and grown into a leader she hadn't even known she could be. The office was mostly empty, the hum of the day's activity having faded into a peaceful silence. It was in moments like this, after the whirlwind of meetings and decisions, that she could truly reflect on how much had changed. She thought about the team she now led, the projects that were thriving under her guidance, and the trust that David had placed in her from the beginning. David! His mentorship and unwavering belief in her had been instrumental. Their bond had grown stronger through every challenge they had faced together. And it was his faith in her abilities that had given her the confidence to succeed. She smiled, thinking of how far their partnership had come from that first warning she had given him about Ryan's betrayal, to the present, where they were leading the company into an exciting new chapter together. Emily knew that the future held more challenges, but now they felt like opportunities. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first walked into that cafe months ago. She had transformed into someone with purpose, someone who could navigate the complexities of leadership and still stay true to herself. As she turned to leave the office, a feeling of quiet satisfaction settled in her chest. The lights of the city flickered below, a reminder of the world of possibilities that lay ahead. Emily felt ready for whatever was to come, confident in her abilities and the strong team around her. The journey had been long, but it was far from over. This was just the beginning of a future she could shape. One where her leadership and courage would continue to drive the company and herself toward even greater heights. And as she walked out into the night, Emily knew one thing for certain: she had found her place, and the best was yet to come.